hand over to our special guest today, Tom Simpson from the Guinness Partnership. So Word Nerds have been working with the Guinness Partnership for some time now. They are a great bunch of data analysts, data scientists, and kind of customer care specialists. A couple of weeks ago, we had a catch-up call where we were just kind of sharing information like this and sort of sharing learnings. And Tom showed us through a project that he's been working on about how they have been starting to use complaints data predictively to stop them, to stop escalations to the Ombudsman. And obviously, we are Word Nerds. We get extremely excited by interesting implementations of data. And what he showed us blew our minds. We thought it was amazing, and we were very excited to invite him on today. I should say thank you to Tom, not just for your time, but for your generosity in sharing this information. I know a lot of hard work's gone into the project, and the fact that you're open to sharing it with everybody else today is really great. It's one of the reasons we love working in housing. You guys are all brilliant at sharing best practice and information and learning, and it makes everybody's job much, much easier. So it's a big billing, Tom. You're going to have to live up to it, but we are extremely excited. And I promise you, people who haven't seen this before, this is going to knock your socks off. It's going to be really good. So hopefully that is an acceptable way for you all to spend the next 54 minutes of your lives. We'll try and rattle through our stuff and give as much time as possible to Tom. We're really keen to leave lots of time for Q&A at the end, so you've got plenty of sort of time and opportunity to quiz Tom on some of the stuff that he's brought forward, but also ask Helen questions about the Ombudsman data as well. The chat feature is there for you to use at any time. I promise you this works much better as dialogue than monologue. So if you have any comments, questions, observations, or things that you want to share during the process, please bang them in the chat. If we don't pick them up while we're talking, we'll go through at the end in the Q&A, and we'll try and answer as many of those as we can. And we know that you guys are great at making this as interactive as possible, which is, after all, the point of doing it as a live webinar. So that's the plan. Let's crack on and try and get to the good data stuff. So unless this is your first day working in a housing association, you will know that the complaint handling code came into effect on April Fool's Day, and it is now a statutory requirement. And there are 4 key objectives to the code. So clearly the main aim of the code is effective and fair complaint handling. But also the Ombudsman is at pains to stress that they're trying to build a positive complaints culture. We're constantly told complaints aren't something to be feared. They're not something to be discouraged. We want more complaints because they're all opportunities to learn. Often doesn't feel like that, as complaints are escalating in terms of volume, and available resource to deal with them isn't always growing at the same rate. But we do get the point. And clearly, I think one of the things that this code has done has, definitely raised the bar on what people are doing with complaints and how that learning is permeating the organization. And that's why we're here today. And we're talking about the specific things that you can do to learn from these complaints and create this positive culture. The Ombudsman is at pains to say that ideally this should result in the earliest possible resolution of these complaints within the systems and processes of the housing association or the landlord. So the Ombudsman doesn't want to find people. They don't want to be refereeing these issues. So they really encourage everybody to get their ship in order to best kind of deal with these. And in order to do that, they require self-assessment by landlords. So as you know, you have the Complaints Performance and Service Improvement Report to fill in every year. You must publish that on your website, be transparent about what learnings you're taking from your complaints and what you're doing, evidence the fact that you're trying to embrace these issues and improve from them, both at an individual level, but also systemically. So taking that inner loop and outer loop thing, dealing with the individual complaints, but also what are the trends that you're seeing and what can you do strategically further up the pipeline to deal with these things. The Ombudsman has a duty to monitor this compliance, and there are a number of things that they can do if they feel that you're not doing the things that you should be. It starts with a complaint handling failure order. and can result, if things don't improve, in serious maladministration rulings, often attached with fines. And a lot of the work that Helen has been and the team have been doing is looking at the direction of travel of those fines, which types of complaints are resulting in serious maladministration, and some of the trends that she's found there are kind of interesting, and potentially a wee bit worrying. So that's the starting point. We are all on the same page. As ever with these things, we like to begin by finding out how you feel about all of this stuff. And so behind the scenes now, Scott will be trying to smash buttons to get the poll up on the screen. Here it is. Well done. I'm so relieved. So yeah, there you are, Scott. Well done. So there's a poll on the screen. Please fill it in. Please vote. Basically, the question is, when it comes to knowledge systems and processes required to comply with the code, is your organization not okay, okay for now, good, or great? We love this scoring system. Regular viewers of Word Nerd stuff will know that we hate 1 to 10 or 1 to 5 for all kinds of reasons that you already know. Nobody gives a 10, nobody gives 1 to 3, but we really love this idea of only having 4 options, because it forces you to decide whether you are above the line that requires improvement or below that line. So it's a nice little kind of discipline to get into, and we certainly use this a lot internally. Lots of votes going in, which is great. We're just going to keep it open for another few seconds. If you haven't voted, please hit the button now. All right, it seems to have calmed down. So we've got about 60% of you put yourselves in the good or great category. So just under 2/3, which is fantastic. That's brilliant to see. But it does mean that about just over 1/3 of people would say they're either not okay or okay for now and require some kind of improvement. That's entirely understandable. We always say with anything to do with data, this is always a journey. Even the Toms and the Guinnesses of this world don't have everything licked. There is always stuff that we can learn, and everybody is on that journey together. So thank you for sharing that. If you want to put additional comments about why you think that in the chat, we would love to hear from you. But while you're doing that, I'm going to hand over to Helen, and Helen's going to share with us some of the work that they've been doing with the Ombudsman data.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Pete. That was great. So myself and the team have been looking at the Ombudsman complaints reports. Specifically, the areas that I wanted to cover today are the complaint handling failure orders, which we know can occur alongside the number of complaints that we're looking at, severe maladministration findings, and also more recently the monthly key findings and learnings reports. It's worth saying we run this analysis quite regularly at Word Nerds, and the reason why we do it is so that we can support our customers and clients with extra data points to help them understand what's essentially coming through the data and how we can use that in their own complaints processes to improve. None of this, I would imagine, is going to be much of a shock, but just to kind of run through the top line figures for the data this year. As I say, we're looking at a full financial year, so 1st of April 2023 to 31st of March 2024. And throughout the analysis, we're comparing it to the previous year. So what we're seeing is, as of last year, 2,446 complaints were raised to the Ombudsman. That has increased year on year by 29%, so just about a third higher than in previous years. And of those, we've seen quite a significant proportion of those have found their way into a maladministration finding. And that what we're seeing there is that that has increased year on year by 69%. Which is obviously quite a startling increase. And of those complaint handling failure orders, there were 156 of them. That's 12% increase year on year, and possibly the most startling figure that we've got when we're looking at year on year data comparisons here is the number of is the proportion of findings that are reaching now a severe maladministration finding. We had 60 last year. That represents a 375% increase. And really what we're seeing is just the Ombudsman is really starting to kick into gear in terms of their expectations, and sort of failure to comply will result in fines at this stage. when we analysed the complaint handling failure orders, the first thing we wanted to look at was just the proportion of those that complied versus the findings that were not complied with. And what we can see year on year is sort of steady increases, 22 to 23. But what we have seen at the back end of this last financial year, so Q1 of 2024, is quite a significant, actually the biggest proportion of not complied with complaint handling failure orders that we've seen in the last 2 years. And again, this just speaks to the trends that we're seeing, where the Ombudsman is probably getting stricter, the expectations are getting higher, the requirement for you to ensure that processes and policies are in place are becoming they're becoming more strict with their approaches. For those of you that have seen previous versions of this report, our scatter graph just looks to essentially show you the number of severe maladministration reports that we've had in the last 2 years, and the volume of fines that are coming through. And obviously in the last few years, we've seen quite a few big changes in this area. Firstly, the £5,000 cap has been lifted. So what we're seeing is year-on-year maladministration cases have risen by 70%, and severe maladministration cases have quadrupled. The average fine since that £5,000 cap has been lifted has also increased by, on average, 32%. But we also saw the biggest fine that's ever been administered by the Ombudsman last year at £16,875. That was to Southwark Council for essentially an issue with a leak that was left unresolved for several months. Actually, the fine itself is quite reflective of the fact that the resident wasn't able to live in the property during that time, and it reflects the amount of rent payback. So what we're not seeing is huge punitive damages going on top of these fines, which was definitely something that I think a lot of housing associations were worried about when that housing cap was lifted, that these could be, where does the fine end? How big could they potentially go? They do seem to be proportionate to the cost to the resident, but that's not to say that these bigger fines won't start to increase and become more frequent as well. And then finally, I suppose that the point really with all of this is that it's not really about the fines, as we all know. In the grand scheme of things, the fines themselves aren't the biggest issue. I think what we're looking to try and do is really protect you from those reputational risks that come with the serious maladministration findings, and make sure that, obviously, as an organisation, you're as prepared as possible for with the data that you've got, and you can be in control of the complaints that are coming through, particularly when they're coming through in bigger swathes. You've got fewer resources to deal with these, and the complexity of them is increasing. Within the report that we've produced, we've cited the main essentially causes of a severe maladministration finding. Unless you've been living under a rock, this will not be surprising to anyone. The kind of key issues that we're seeing still this year: damp and mold, leaks and repairs, are the top 3 causes of a severe maladministration finding. When we did this report last year, one of the things that we flagged was these things, when you spot a damp and mold issue, a leak issue or a repair issue, and it's exacerbated by a complaint handling failure, the chances are it's going to lead to a severe maladministration finding. Actually, that's become slightly more complex, and we'll dive into that in more detail for this year. But really what we are seeing is, whilst those top issues are still the biggest issues this year, we're seeing some big trends starting to move in the data in terms of what else is kind of cropping up, and what you might also need to start listening for with more intent through your own data sets. I think every housing association that I speak to these days has got a little flag for damp and mold issues or leaks within the property. There are other things now that are starting to rise in the data quite quickly that we would definitely recommend starting to pay attention to. The list that we've got here are the top issues, but just to call out, ASB has doubled. Well, it's more than doubled, actually. It's gone from 4% to 14% as a proportion of the findings compared to the previous year. And the other one that we wanted to call out was issues around access to property under an accessibility bracket, this has increased from 4% to 7%, and we're going to dive into these two topics in particular detail, just to give you a bit more detail on those two areas. So as I mentioned, starting with antisocial behaviour, these findings have sort of doubled. The reports within the severe maladministrations have doubled from 2023-24 to compared to 2022-23. We're also seeing a huge overlap with within these reports around reports of poor mental health of the resident. And really what we're seeing there is this is exacerbated by poor record keeping. So an understanding of who lives behind the door is really key. Segmentation projects can really help in this area to make sure that you understand what your residents, how your residents are affected, and make sure that those records are up to speed. The second thing that's coming through is clear actions need to be taken, but they need to be taken probably quicker than a lot of housing associations are currently putting actions in place, and really being proactive in this area and picking up antisocial behaviour in your data as quickly as possible, and looking at exacerbating factors can really help prevent those escalations from becoming serious. The second point that we wanted to bring up was around accessibility and disability. And really the overlap here is around the focusing on the distress and how the customer feels amongst these particular issues that they're having. There is quite an interesting focus as well on how you communicate your processes with residents who have accessibility or disability needs. Specifically, what we've pulled out here is an example where a landlord has essentially focused on the process over over how the customer feels, and really the sort of the learnings and the key sort of findings that we've seen from the Ombudsman here is really practical approaches over human costs will be penalised, and so really what we're looking at is how we can use this information to better understand the processes and how you can effectively handle these types of complaints. One of the pieces of work that we're looking to do within our platform is to start to have a look at the organic topics of conversation. So these are not necessarily the hot topics or the issues that we're specifically looking for. These are the organic topics that are coming out of the data sets as we're looking at them. And Pete will go into a bit more detail about how we draw these out. The reason why we've looked at this is because we want to understand if there's any topics of conversation in this year's reports that are rising quicker or increasing in the data set compared to last year. And there are two that we wanted to kind of call out today. The first is, and it reflects itself in some of the findings that we've already spoken about around accessibility and disability, is that focus on the customer. The single largest increase in topics across the years was causing distress to the resident. So the Ombudsman is increasingly looking at not just the nature of the complaint and how it comes through, but the impact that it's having on residents. So topics around mental health, vulnerabilities are really, really key to make sure that we understand what's happening to a resident during the process, and if there are any exacerbating issues like that. The second thing that we wanted to call out today was around mentions of policy. So policy was mentioned almost 4 times as frequently this year than compared to last year. And what we mean by policy is not that organisations or landlords don't have policies in place. They do. That's definitely called out by the Ombudsman. They recognise that these policies are there. What we're seeing is a lack of understanding across those policies by staff, and this is really where training and awareness of these policies comes in and is key. If there's one takeaway that we'd recommend from today, it's make sure that your staff really understand policies, particularly when it comes to those hot topic issues that we raised with the bar charts. And essentially, how can you use this information? We will share the full report so that you can have a look at all of this in more detail, but I definitely don't want to take away from Tom's time today. So I guess the main takeaway we have is ultimately look out for these hot topic issues that are coming through the Ombudsman reports. These are essentially learnings that we can take. They don't just have to be the learnings from within your organisation, but where last year we were just sort of saying if they're exacerbated by complaint handling failures, you're likely to see a severe maladministration finding. Actually, those exacerbating factors are probably more complex. We're starting to understand what else might be an exacerbating factor. Issues around vulnerability, mental health, accessibility, disability, whether or not the policies in place have been followed in the right way. These are all actually becoming if you start seeing across the complaints these sorts of issues topping up, then we're likely to see, in the worst case scenario, a severe maladministration finding if it were to go to the Ombudsman. So really what we'd advocate is making sure that you understand across each of your complaints whether or not these sorts of issues are occurring together.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Helen. Very much appreciate that. And well done for not going into labour before the end of that was my big worry for the day. So
Mine too.
Good. Yeah, it's really interesting. Shout out also to Steve at Word Nerds, who did a lot of the word crunching on this work.
100%.
Hard on that just before he went on holiday. There's already some great questions in the chat. I think we'll pick those up at the Q&A at the end. But do please keep them coming in. I really like that question from Howard about potentially people using mental health as a way to increase payouts. Howard, you cynical thing. But obviously, Helen's looked at this the way that we look at this. So in the most serious cases, what might that mean and what's the trends there? Obviously, housing associations look at it through a slightly different angle. We've kind of gone top down, and a lot of you will be more worried about how do you stop things getting to the Ombudsman in the first instance. And I think at this point, I'm going to hand over to Tom and let him explain how he started to tackle that process along with the team at Guinness. Tom.
Okay, doke. Yeah, cheers for that, Pete, and thank you very much, Helen, for your presentation just then. So I guess just in terms of setting the scene, then, the project that we're going to discuss right now, it's all about trying to predict those cases where we have an internal complaint. The customer goes through our internal complaints process and then ultimately goes to the Ombudsman despite us giving an answer that we think is the correct solution for the case. So it's all about establishing that link between what kind of factors and what kind of customers are likely to take the full journey from complaint stage 1 all the way over to the Ombudsman investigation. So if we can move over, we created a model ultimately that had a accuracy rating of 78%. So what that means is, and we'll go into a little detail on exactly how you monitor this, but it means that when you're trying to predict all of the complaint ones that will be resolved internally, and get them in they'll be internal bucket, and all of the complaint ones that will go to the Ombudsman, and get those in the Ombudsman bucket, and then divide the difference. Essentially, we've got that nearly 80% mark. So I'll explain that in a little detail, but for the sample that we had, it's quite robust. Out of all the complaints we get, I think it was maybe 3 or 4% were actually going to the Ombudsman. So that's quite a good figure if we can be getting it right 80% of the time. So yeah, building a machine learning solution, it's a continuous process. So it might sound a little daunting, especially as an analyst who's never engaged in machine learning before. This, it sounds almost magical, and there's a lot of sort of hype and promotion put on the sector as a whole right now. But fundamentally, I guess just the one thing I'd like to say just before we go into a little detail of it is that, especially at practitioner level, and I only consider myself a practitioner, I don't do any of the advanced maths, but at a practitioner level, not any individual part of it's complicated. It's just that there's maybe 15 things to consider during your project. So it's something that's wide rather than deep to understand. I guess what I'm trying to say is that if it's something you like the idea of moving towards, chipping at it bit by bit and learning each individual part's relatively easy, eventually you will get to the stage where you can put it all together. So you can see there's sort of a full loop there. All, as anybody who knows the data analyst life cycle, all about bringing in your data, doing your full exploration of the data, building out some variables from that you can test, and we'll go into more detail. But for example, one variable that we tried to establish whether there was a link between the number of repairs raised in the previous year and the likelihood of going to an ombudsman case. So you build out a set of variables like that, and then you plug that all into various models, do some processing to make sure it all runs squeaky clean, and then you evaluate the performance there. So if we can move over to the next slide. What I did was I tested our data after processing it against a couple of different models. So just listing them off here, there was one called K nearest neighbors that works by looking at similar data points. There was one called logistic regression. It sort of plots a center line and tries to give you a percentage yes or no. But the one that was most effective was one that's called the random forest. So random forest was our top performer. And you can see here we've got a little bit of a sort of a decision tree here. So this is somebody speculating as whether they should take a new job on or not. And you can see right at the top, they've got that initial question, yes or no, and then feeding questions from that. And that's how the algorithm works. So say I've put in a list of variables, number of complaints in the previous year, number of repairs, customers talked about a disability, etc. It'll go through all of these, giving yes, no answers, trying to get ultimately into the will it be ombudsman, will it not be ombudsman. So the algorithm works by combining several hundred of these decision trees and making an average of them. That's why they call it a random forest, because it's a random amalgamation of a bunch of different decision trees. So if we can move over to the next one, and again, please, yeah. So when we're analyzing performance, and I won't go into too much detail here because it's easy to get confused until you have a chance to really sit down and have a stare at it. But when we're monitoring performance in a classification, so classifications just will it be this or will it be that category rather than a regression where it's trying to predict a number. So here we can start thinking of things like true positive, true negative, positive, and things like that. So I'm sure we've all heard, and unfortunately, Kelton's got COVID at the moment, but when we had our COVID period and it was very intense, we were all talking about sort of what was the true positive rate of the test, how reliable is it, and things like that. So if we just look at just true positive itself, what we can say is if the actual class was positive, so if the person was actually had COVID in this case, and if the predicted class, so if the test said this person has COVID when they do have COVID, you can see the overlap there makes it a true positive. And that's something we want our model to go towards. And without going through all of them, the other one we are very interested in is a true negative as well. So if the person doesn't have COVID and the test goes, nope, you don't have COVID, you can mingle, then we're very interested in that one as well. You can see a bunch of metrics along the side. That's just as you start getting a little bit more advanced, you get all of these percentage scores out of that, and you can really sort of compare one algorithm against another. But we can just jump onto the next page for now. So the three sources that I used in terms of data for this was our North Cape repairs data, so responsive repairs, line detail data with all of your works order information in that. We had our CRM data, so that's our complaints data, including things like the type of complaint, what the description of the complaint is, and things like that. And then linked in from that CRM data, we actually managed to use the WordNerds platform to generate a list of variables and keywords actually that we could search in the description text. So if we can move on to the next one, we can look at the 5 key influencers. So I said earlier during that evaluation stage that I had a list of variables. I think I ended up feeding about 20 variables into the model. These were the top 5 performers. So what I'm trying to say is that these are the aspects that, in our case, with our data, were the most important in establishing a link between complaint 1 going all the way to the ombudsman. So we can see as the first one, we've got complaints to cancelled over 25%. So what that means in plain English is it's the ratio of works orders raised that were actually complete versus the ratio of versus the number, of works orders that were cancelled. So as you can imagine, if a customer has a issue and within our system, a customer can raise repairs directly themselves, say they're raising a complaint over and over again and trying to get something moved, our company's saying, look, we have a works order, but it's just waiting there. It might be indicative of a customer who really wants traction on an issue, but our repairs team just doesn't have the resource to go there straight away. Alternatively, it could be a case of something like no accesses to the property, or another type of failure where it's actually us as a company who are cancelling more works orders than we're getting done, so it's our fault type thing. We've got our second variable as damp works orders. So that's just anything that's related to damp. As we all know, that's a key thing. We've got any keyword present. So there was a list of maybe 20, 25 keywords that we got from the Word Nerds platform, just pulling out things like, is it related to a toilet? Is it related to somebody saying, talking about their child? So one interesting way of framing that was, if you search for the word years old within our description text, at least, when our operatives are describing the case in CRM, they'd go, has a child 5 years old, what, etc., etc. And that's normally an indicator that there is actually a young child there, for example. So that was another keyword that the Word Nerds platform allowed us to get at. Then more than 4 service failures. So service failures are now phased out within our company, but previously we had a measure short of a complaint called a service failure. So if somebody's raising a lot of issues that need looking into in the past, that's something that's significant. And then finally, what I've described as an SOR recall works order. So this is just any works order where something with the same SOR trade code, so the same job description essentially, is raised within the same 2 weeks. So if I have a plumbing type 3 job at a property, and then within 2 weeks the exact same code of jobs being raised, it might indicate that that first job wasn't really done properly. And this is something that has a big link from complaint 1 to Ombudsman. Essentially, we're not getting the job done when we go out and fix it. If we could move on to the next slide then. So once I'd built the model, what I'd done is I took that data and I fed it into our Power BI platform. So this is just a dashboarding tool similar to ClickView or Tableau, if you have access to those. I guess just one thing I want to just point out here is sort of the suggested workflow of this piece. So just as one tip to anybody else who's an analyst in the chat, just to, if you are ever producing dashboarding analytics, I think it's always very good to have a suggested workflow in terms of, if I'm the typical user, in this case, if I'm a complaints manager, and I'm not really familiar too much with Power BI, what can I do to come in, see the things I'm most interested in, drill down into that background data, and then walk away with what I actually wanted? So if we move on to the next page, we can see sort of the first stage of that. Sorry, just in the presentation there. Yep. Great. So this is our sort of our main landing page here. We can see that we've got an overview of sort of where the model is in terms of accuracy, how many complaints have been raised over time, and then where you can see the big black redacted sort of thing just to hide some customer details. This is a list of all of the properties that our model has highlighted as potentially going to go to the Ombudsman based on those variables. So from this, our customer service team can come in, they can either export that straight as a list, or they can go on to the next page in the PowerPoint, please, and they can see the full detail there for the property. So this is pulling out quite a few more of the variables there. You can see complaints to cancelled ratios there, complaints in the previous 12 months, previous service failures, and things like that. So this is just sort of a little information package now that complaints have if they want to look into a specific property there. So that's what I've completed. Now, I understand everybody's at a different level in terms of technology within their company and sort of their own ability in processing this. But I do think this kind of intervention can be replicated relatively easily. If we move on to the next slide. So it's all about really the first stage of this is you can get really deep, and I'm happy to provide any support to anybody who wants to go down that machine learning journey. But you can also do something very similar to this by just setting up simple warning flags and a simple warning flag report, which is sort of like the first stage towards it. It's more about sort of inductive reasoning and a bit of negotiation with operations, but that's just part and parcel of the data world. So essentially, it'd be just a 3-stage process. Obviously, quite a bit of work within these first 2 stages, but first thing, you want to get your data together. And I've just picked 3 variables that I think everybody'd have access to in terms of the number of customer contacts within the past previous year. So you could, at each property, you work out how many repairs were in the last year, how many customer contacts were in the last year, etc. And then you just produce an average for this. Then you do the same thing for every property where it went to Ombudsman, just making sure that you're counting that year before the date of the Ombudsman case. So you've got a picture of that 12 months before Ombudsman happened. And you can see in this little example, I've just made up the numbers, but you'd normally expect that these figures are going to be larger in your Ombudsman case. So you can see repairs difference of 3 to 8, for example, which allows you to have a empowered conversation with operations to say, okay, yeah, well, let's put a report in where if any property has more than 5 repairs, it's well on the way to that average of 8. We're going to have this flagged, and then we can do some special intervention there or double checking or what have you. And it's a sizable project, but I think that's something that everybody can get started with. And I did this in a different domain before I went onto the machine learning stuff, and it was very well received by operations. So that's one thing I'd suggest. And if we can move on to the next page, just a quick thing about setting up those keywords in WordNerd. So not trying to embarrass the WordNerd staff by me enjoying their tools, but I do think it's very good, especially if you're going down the sort of the CRM complaints handling route. You can get all of your descriptions from your complaints data. And what I'd say for this is maybe in the previous 6 to 18 months on a property level before an Ombudsman investigation. I mean, you could do some exploration to see if it works for yourselves, but that's what I found as a good range in terms of we've got everyone going to Ombudsman in that range. You put into the WordNerds platform, and those guys can give you advice on exactly how to do that. And then you can export all of the themes in CSV. So like when I said complaints about a toilet, complaints about children, etc., and into keywords, and then fairly simple, just Google how to use in Excel, Power BI, R, whatever you're using, how to pull a keyword analysis out of that data, and then all you need to do, refresh your data. And these are the keywords that I found while I was doing a similar project. So we can see along the side there, these are all the ones that I looked through, and after a bit of discussion with people with a bit more operational knowledge than me, we had this column here called all, and then we split them out into various sort of subcategories there and built some analytics off them. So hopefully that was all easily digestible. That's my part done. But if anybody wants any help with anything like this, I'll just pop my email in the chat. Do feel free to give us a shout, because I'm always happy to collaborate. Okay, cheers. Back to you.
Thanks, Tom. That was brilliant. I just love the bit that you couldn't show today for reasons of data privacy and security. Actually, when you see it in the dashboard in Power BI and it's interactive, it takes on a life of its own. You can really see that journey that Tom spoke about there. If you're if you're an operational user, you don't need to know anything about Power BI. You can just click on the list of properties that are at risk. You can go into a property. It flags the things that the statistical model has said make something more likely to be sort of escalated. And it's a really easy process to both use and understand. And I think what you've done really elegantly is taken a very complex data science process and just given it a really nice front end that anybody can use. And it's well worth taking Tom up on his offer, his very kind offer to kind of support people with this stuff. So if you think something like this is really kind of useful in your organization, then please do get in touch with him and with us as well. I'm sure that we'll be helping more of our customers come up with something similar in the forthcoming weeks and months. So thank you very much indeed for that. There's some bunch of questions coming through that we're going to pick up in the Q&A afterwards. We're going to open the Q&A in a couple of minutes. Just very quickly before we do, it would be remiss of me not to just talk in a bit of detail about Word Nerd's kind of ongoing sort of support in this process. As Tom mentioned, the bit that we help with is the bit after we get your complaints data and the bit before the statistical kind of number crunching. So we can take a bunch of text data and turn it into numbers for your model. We do that in two ways. Helen mentioned organic topics, this process of seeing what's in the data without having to train classification models in advance. That's really important. Training classifications models is great, but it's not really listening. You don't spot the stuff that's new in the data, the unknown unknowns that you didn't think to listen for. It's not something that AI and machine learning is very good at doing. For that, we use corpus linguistics, so the study of structure of language. But the first sort of step on the journey of complaints analysis is just seeing what's in the data and how that's changing, similar to how Helen did that with the Ombudsman data. Once you found stuff that you care about, either because it's new and it's interesting, or because it's on that list of issues that Tom's found or that the Ombudsman is fining against, there's then a process of training classification models. We find that some of that can be done by just sharing models that other people have already trained. Some of it has to be done specifically on your data, and the WordNerds platform allows you to train a classification model on your own data, which is really important because your residents have different language, different idioms than other parts of the country and world. That can be something as simple as keyword analysis, like Tom said. We also have the idea of AI-driven context themes. So where people are talking about something, Tom mentioned, a 5-year-old, there are multiple ways people can talk about 5-year-old children, kids, whatever it is. And our AI groups all of those things together and puts them all in the same bucket to identify them for you. When it's identified, we can do a couple of things with it. We can either create a managed report for you, more on that in a second. So our analysts kind of producing a report on your behalf. But for the customers that use us regularly and that have subscriptions with us, we also push that stuff out to a bunch of different data integration endpoints. That can be something as simple as CSV files and Excel, like Tom said, or it can be automated so that we push into a data lake like Amazon Redshift. We basically mark up all of the data with these classifications as we go, push to Amazon Redshift, and then you can pull that information into Power BI. So all of this stuff can happen in real time, and we can flag these things coming through the platform so you can see those things if you want. So that's how we fit in with that. We do have an offer for everybody on the call today. If you're thinking about using this, if there's a bit of a bell curve going on where people at the start of this process were looking at where they felt they were in the journey. Most people are, in good shape with this, which is great. But if you are thinking about your first steps in doing something else, a managed report is a great starting point, a great jumping off point. It's low risk and it's easy. You give us your complaints data for the last year or two. We run it through our platform, go through exactly that process that we've spoken about, and we will help you come up with that list of hot button issues that you can then start to feed into your statistical modeling or your flagging system or whatever it was that Tom mentioned about the different ways that you can then use this data. If that's interesting, please get in touch after the webinar. We'd love to answer your questions, have a chat about it, and if it works out, we'd love to pick that up. And the majority of people that try that, it's a great way of building advocacy and understanding in your business about what's possible. And then if that's appropriate, if you want to go onto a subscription and do something a bit more kind of always on dashboardy, then you can move from there. That's the end of the party political broadcast on behalf of the Word Nerds Party. Thank you for that. Let's open up the questions. There was a really interesting question early on for, I guess, Helen, but Tom, I'm sure you've got an opinion on this as well. When Helen mentioned the increase in the number of mentions that mental health issues are getting in the Ombudsman data, Cynical Howard came back with a question about whether or not people might be using that as a way to as a way to sort of increase payouts. Prash, I don't know whether you've got a view on that, or Tom, I don't know whether you've got a follow-up as well. Prash.
Yes, I think it's a great question and it's a great observation. I think we don't have data at the moment that would suggest that. We can probably pull it together, and I will ask Steve to have a little look for you. We don't have data to suggest that when mental health is mentioned in the report that the fine is higher. So I think that's something that we need to kind of keep an eye on. I do think that what is in the data though is that the Ombudsman is referencing this stuff more. The vulnerabilities, these exacerbating factors, are definitely a factor in their decision to produce a severe maladministration finding as opposed to a maladministration finding. So I suppose from that perspective, you could argue that there is potentially a fine being for compensation driver there that I think we need to keep talking about as an industry, and working with the Ombudsman to see. I would like to think that ultimately it's, if you follow your policies and your processes and the complaint is handled correctly, that irrespective of the situation of the resident in these instances, you would still be okay. But I don't have we don't have the data to support that yet. It's definitely something we'll keep an eye on, and try and kind of look at for next time.
Perfect. Thanks, Prash. There's a couple of questions coming in for Tom, so I'm going to move on to those. I think that was a pretty full answer. The first one's around kind of typos and misspellings and things like that. Tom, do you want to talk a bit about how you handle that? Helen, I know you've got an opinion on that because of the way that the Word Nerds handles it, but we'll start with Tom.
Yeah, so as Pete just said, my main focus was more around sort of statistical modelling, especially from the EDA exploratory data analysis, where I did all of the real hands-on stuff of processing everything, 'cause that's my speciality really, rather than natural language processing. So in terms of the typos within the data, that was all handled by the Word Nerds platform. So I'm happy to hand over to Helen for that one.
Yeah, so I suppose within the Word Nerds platform, there's two ways that you can categorize data. Keywords being the first way, or the simplest way, and that works really well if vocabulary is less likely to be spelled incorrectly, or we've got things like neighborhood names, things like that, where there are limitations to the way that a customer might describe the same thing. The second way that we categorize data is through something that we call context themes, and that is essentially building an AI classifier. You don't have to be a data scientist to build these, but essentially what that's doing is it's looking for specific issues in the data or specific topics in the data, and finding all of the people that talk about those issues, irrespective of the vocabulary that they use. And that's really important because essentially it's looking at structures of language and lots of sort of machine learning techniques to allow us to find people that are talking about the same thing when they use different vocabulary. That handles misspellings, sarcasm, things that are quite nuanced in language, but in a way that keywording just doesn't, because you would have to think about every single way that a keyword would essentially be misspelled or used. So those are the two sort of options. We get around the sort of complexities of language by using AI rather than keywording for those specific examples. We can show it on demo if that's easier as well.
Thank you, Helen. Lots of love for Tom's presentation in the chat. Thank you for the encouragement, guys. Really appreciate that. Steve and the crew at Riverside, good to see you lot. Another one of Word Nerds, fantastic clients and a great team. Tom, you're going to be very busy, I think. I think you're going to get lots of follow-up for this, so I hope you're not planning on any holidays soon. Question from Liz. How long did it take for you to test out and hone in on the key variables you arrived at in your predictive model?
Yeah, so when it comes to variables and that, it's the technical term for its feature selection. But when it comes to getting all of your variables for the model before you've actually put it into any of the algorithms, that's actually the most labor-intensive part. So you've got to think for each one. You've got to say, if I'm trying to establish not only the number of repairs in the previous year, but a threshold at which I want to check for a category, yes or no. So should it be over 4 repairs in the previous year, over 5 repairs? That's a mini sort of data project in itself that, would be the same as a small ad hoc you'd get from, say, a service manager or something like that coming in. So when you're going through the data and you've got 20 or 30 of those, it can actually become quite a substantial project. And when you're planning, you really should be focusing really on getting that feature selection process right early on and straight away. But that's going to be the main chunk of it. Because like I said, being a practitioner rather than somebody who really delves into the hardcore maths of things, I'm using out of the box solutions for the actual algorithm part. So providing I've done all of my job of getting the data in the right order, in the right format before it goes into that, it's just a case of knowing the coding language, and that's a small issue. So yeah, it really is the main part of any projects like this.
Fantastic. Thanks, Tom. We've got an additional point from Chris, also at Guinness. WordNet supplied us with a macro that helps takes out the irrelevant information. Oh, yeah, okay. You guys can read that in the chat. That's a detailed point in response to Steve's issue. Thanks for that, Chris, and good to see you. Okay, if there are no more questions, or if there are any more questions for Tom, please drop them in the chat now. We're nearly at time. So just in terms of follow-up, after this webinar, we're going to send you a copy of today's slides. You'll also get a link to a recording of the webinar today. If you think there are other people in the organization that would benefit from seeing this, I love Tom's point about the negotiation process with operations. You made that sound really simple. I bet you it really was. And, if you want to spread this information around, please feel free to do that. We'll also include the more detailed write-up of the Ombudsman analysis that Helen mentioned. And then we'll follow this all up with requests for advice from you guys. We love doing these webinars. We learn a lot from them and we get great feedback from them. But we're always on the sniff to find out what you enjoyed, what was less useful, and crucially, what topics you'd like us to cover next. We do them approximately monthly, and so we will be coming to you for your advice on that. All that remains for me to say is thank you so much, Tom, for sharing that with us. You did not disappoint. It was really cool. Big thanks to Helen as well. Tom is off to make numbers float. I'm off on holiday. Helen is off to have a baby. One of those things will result in a suntan, and the other one will be a tiny human being. So we'll very much look forward to you coming back. This doesn't happen without you guys who turn up. Thank you so much for coming. We really appreciate your ongoing support. Have a great rest of the week, and we will see you soon.